morning, everybody. I'm Nathan D. I'm the Director of Product Innovation at Magellan Rx. We're going to talk specifically about Copay Assistance today. Some information about Magellan Rx is up on the screens, full service PBM, but specifically about Copay Assistance. And I actually want to start with a number that's not up there because I was just looking at it this morning, and that is if you start the story at the middle in terms of, at the beginning, with relative to Copay Assistance, in the last 12 months, the average monthly cost per specialty claim is right around $3,600. And that's a recurring expense, right? It's not like a medical claim where it happens and maybe it doesn't recur, or there may be other spend associated with it, but specialty claims and pharmacy in general, as you know, tend to happen pretty regularly once a member starts therapy, unless they become non-compliant for some reason. So $3,600 a month, a little over $40,000 a year. It's roughly 3 times what the average person spends per month on their mortgage. So it's not an insignificant number, and the percentage of spend that it represents for most plans is going up. As a matter of fact, when I started at Magellan about 5 years ago, specialty spend alone accounted for something like 25% on average of the total RX spend in a given plan. And today that's much closer to 35, 40%. It's not uncommon in a given population to see it reach as high as 50%. And that's coming out of 1% of the claims. So for every 100 claims, one of those, in some cases, drives 50% of the total spend compared to the rest of the 99. So in response to pricing pressure around specialty drugs and other things, what you've seen is that middle statistic, which is that plans have begun to share cost more with their members, whether that's through different benefit designs like deductibles increasing or switching from more traditional PPO plan designs to HDHPs. We've seen that trend kind of catch on and spread, and member cost share associated with the overall total spend of the benefit has risen. And Copay Assistance predated all of that, but it's in response to the increasing member cost share, we've seen Copay Assistance grow. Also, so that's that left statistic that you see up there, namely that going back a couple of years ago, there were a handful of drugs that had Copay Assistance. Today, or excuse me, in 2015, I think it is, there were more than 700, and there's no numbers that I could see that were more recent than that, but my guess is we're probably talking about more than 700 drugs at this point that have some kind of Copay Assistance program that's meant to offset member cost. This is an example of some of the programs that are out there. So, these are some of the more significant cost drivers. Your Humiras and Enbrels and Stellaras, your Hep C therapies, the Mavorette, the Harvonis, Epclusas, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all programs that have, all drugs, that have Copay Assistance programs that are meant to offset members' cost, whatever that cost is. We're actually going to skip this guy and just do a little bit defining of terms. So when we talk about Copay Assistance in particular, we're talking about that leftmost column there, the middle one, specifically those programs that are offered by a manufacturer to members that are not needs-based. So they can be pretty generous programs, which we'll talk about more in a second, in terms of the dollars available, but members don't quantify their income or financial hardship in order to qualify for these programs. Enrollment typically is personal information and confirmation of a diagnosis, and that gets you access to, in some cases, $10,000, $20,000 annually to cover the cost of a particular drug. So they're typically targeted at commercially insured members and generally can't be used for members who are part of government-run programs. That's to be differentiated from the patient assistance program, so it's not going to be the focus of our topic today. That's kind of a broader term that sometimes encompasses Copay Assistance, but the patient assistance is specifically those programs that are needs-based. They are sometimes offered by manufacturers, sometimes by third-party foundations. Those ones are the kind that you supply W-2 information, tax information. You really have to establish a financial need to participate in those ones. So we're just going to talk specifically about the Copay Cards, Copay Assistance, or what's sometimes called coupons today. To give you a sense of the amount of funds available, these are some of the top movers. You can see Humira and Enbrel, Stelara, and some of the others there. These are the total dollars available annually from the manufacturer on some of these items, so not inconsequential amounts. And I think a thing to think about now through the rest of our conversation here today is if the manufacturer of Humira, for instance, and we'll just use that, pick on it because it's number one in terms of spend, if the manufacturer of Humira has $16,000 available annually to a member to offset cost, the question really comes down to is a plan design that's being operated on a member's behalf, is it capable of capturing that amount of money? Typically, member cost share, even with the increase in deductibles and so forth across an entire benefit year, is something more like $2,500. So that's leaving money on the table that's available from pharma. So just something to think about as we go through this. This next chart is just in here because I think it's interesting, actually. These are the top 15 charitable foundations by total giving in 2015. If you're like me, the first thing you probably notice is that Bill and Melinda Gates gave away a lot of money that year, more than I'll probably make in something like 1,000 lifetimes. Not sure how that makes me feel. It's mixed feelings, but whatever. But if you look at that for another couple minutes and you're in the industry, probably the next thing you recognize is this, which is that 10 of the top 15 foundations by total giving are actually pharma. And so there's a lot of funds available to members to offset cost. And that's a good thing in a lot of respects, but it can cut both ways, and there are some cause for concern. So namely, kind of the most obvious outcome of some of these programs is to offset member costs, but there is a nullification to a degree of plan design, namely that whatever the copay is that's in place, whether it's a modest $100 or $200 copay, and that's modest by average standards, or whether it's a much larger percentage of the total cost of a drug, Copay Assistance comes in and drives member cost down from whatever that point is, in most cases to a pretty significant degree. Matter of fact, in about 52-53% of claims, member cost after Copay Assistance is applied is zero. And in something like 92-93% of claims, the leftover member responsibility is something less than $5. So significant dollars are coming in and being applied, and that changes the dynamic for members relative to their decision-making process about the therapies that they use. Another element that can be cause for concern is that whether the copay on a given plan or the coinsurance is $50 or $1,000, traditionally the amounts coming to the member via Copay Assistance are all counted toward the accumulators, so the deductible and the out-of-pocket. So whether that's $50 copay and 45 of it's covered, or $1,000 responsibility and a full 1,000 of it is covered by the Copay Assistance program, traditionally you see members getting all of those funds, not just those that came from the member, but all of the Copay Assistance dollars flowing through to the member's deductible and out-of-pocket. Lastly, kind of a more general concern is really the question over, we see this kind of ping-pong effect where drug prices are high, and in response, plans have increased cost share, and in response, pharma has increased the rate of copay assistance available to members, and in response, plans are responding with some of the things that we're going to talk about over the next couple of slides here. But the question is, do those things really lower the cost of care, the cost of drugs, or do they end up ultimately just shifting them from one spot to another? So historically, PBMs and payers have been, to a degree, blind to the existence of copay assistance. So the way this process typically works is the member gets prescribed the drug, they have a primary claim through the PBM at their pharmacy, and they process that through. It generates the member copay. They run a secondary claim that offsets the member cost. But when that's not at the pharmacy of the PBM, the specialty pharmacy, then there really isn't a way to identify when copay assistance has occurred and exactly how much it's paid of the member's total responsibility. So you've seen PBMs in the past be largely blind to the scenario when members were getting copay assistance and exactly how much that was. So what you're seeing is more and more PBMs are shifting utilization to their in-house pharmacies so that they can control that process a little better. They can see when copay assistance is available and is being used. In many cases, the pharmacy's doing the enrollment for the member into those copay assistance programs so that they have a view into that. And the effort, of course, extends from there to the idea of netting the dollars that are from pharma as opposed to those from the member out of the accums so that the member gets credit for those dollars which they spend and not those that come from pharma. Just as an aside, we've seen members in some cases, rare, but it does happen occasionally, where a member will refuse copay assistance, get a claim, pay in full, and then apply for a copay assistance after the fact and submit through pharma and get reimbursement that way to kind of try and work around that process of having those amounts withheld from their accum. So just something to be aware of, that, again, it's kind of that give and take of what we see in response to these kinds of programs. But the next extension of programs like we've just talked about, where you're endeavoring to only apply to the members out of pocket the true spend, is really this next cut. And this is what's becoming more common in the marketplace. At Magellan Rx, you're seeing at a lot of other PBMs also. And it's programs that are sometimes called variable copay or copay assistance maximization. In our case, we call it Value Max. And it's really getting to that question that we talked about earlier, which is, if the manufacturer of Humira makes $16,000 available, is your benefit designed to capture as much of that as possible? Or is your benefit going to come up significantly short of obtaining those dollars? And so what we are seeing more and more are programs like the Value Max program, where member cost is increased on a subset of drugs, either via a floating copay that matches up on a drug-by-drug basis, or a coinsurance without a maximum that drives member cost up to that approximate level of the amount of copay assistance that is available. And the specialty pharmacies are engaged with the members in this process, enrolling them into copay assistance, and then keeping those dollars from ultimately flowing through to the members' accums. And the result of a program like this one, there's actually an error on this slide here, so my apologies in advance, but you can see on the left side an example of what happens in the case of a Humira utilizer where a copay assistance maximization strategy isn't being used. Namely, if you've got about a $5,500 a month drug and a member copay of $100, and let's just say for the sake of argument, because it's pretty common, that the copay assistance comes in and pays 100% of that. So the net cost to the plan is $5,400. But with a program that drives member cost up, and that's where the mistake is here, the member copay would go up to $1,375. So in the case of Humira, something like a 25% coinsurance without a maximum would be what drives a member responsibility of that amount. And there is that much available in copay assistance per month. So that's how you kind of arrive at that number. And that ultimately leads to the plan's leftover responsibility being that $4,125 number, savings of about that $1,275 a month. And over the course of the year, that's pretty significant. It's actually a little more than $15,000 per Humira utilizer. So the Value Max program at Magellan does those things that we've just talked about. So essentially, there's a list of 50 or so specialty drugs which are carved out. A coinsurance without a maximum is applied on a per drug basis. That coinsurance is matched up to the approximate value of the copay assistance program relative to the cost of the drug. Our pharmacy works with the members to get them enrolled in these copay assistance programs at a very high rate. Something like 99 and 99 plus out of every 100 members are enrolled in copay assistance programs. And then flowing through to the accums is just the amount that the member pays. So if they pay nothing, nothing flows through. If they pay $5, that's what flows through. You get the general idea there. So that's Value Max and kind of that broader issue in a little bit of a nutshell. I think we have time for questions, which I'm happy to take. And also, we are available at the table over there to chat about some of the program in particular. I'll just throw in kind of as a last aside here. We piloted the program with about 41,000 lives in 2018 and rolled it out formally in 2019. We have seen a pretty good rate of success. So the average savings for a plan with the implementation of Value Max is somewhere around 8 to 11% of total specialty spend. Between 3 and 5% of total RX spend is pretty common. So there are dollars available to offset some of the escalating costs of specialty drugs that Tom talked about. And it can be done in a way that at the point of sale, the impact to the member is essentially negligible. We leave them intact relative to what they've paid previously. So with that, I will wrap it up.